BioNTech has announced the launch of an ambitious effort to manufacture vaccines in Africa. Now, this German pharmaceutical corporation announced that by the end of the year, it will have set up the first 2 modular mRNA production units in Rwanda. The announcement was made at the 26th Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting held in Kigali, Rwanda. For more on what this means for the continent, I'm joined by Kate Stegeman. Very good afternoon, good evening to you, Advocacy Coordinator at MSF Access Campaign Africa region. Thank you so much for your time. Construction has already begun on this groundbreaking project. Talk to us about its significance.
Hi, Paul, and good evening to your listeners. So basically, as many of you will be aware, when the COVID epidemic, or pandemic, I should say, first started, and the first vaccines were administered in December 2021, we have not had any of those vaccines manufactured locally on the continent. So the fact that BioNTech is now setting up their biocontainers in Kigali is of huge significance in terms of expanding much needed local manufacturing. However, we have some concerns about the fact that they will actually only be able to, they say, according to their timeline, starting at the end of next year. So that's another 18-month wait. And at Doctors Without Borders, at the Access Campaign, what we say is, why could you not have shared your vaccine technology and know-how and these biocontainers with a number of vaccine manufacturers who are already willing and able to receive that technology. So, for example, here in South Africa, we have the mRNA hub hosted by Afrigen in Cape Town. We haven't seen BioNTech, we haven't seen Modular come forward and say, we're willing to support the efforts that you're doing here to make your vaccine. So, while it is a good thing, we're just concerned about the delay.
Yeah.
We also, what is significant and what is a good thing, of course, is that they have also mentioned that they're going to be looking beyond COVID vaccines and looking at much needed life-saving jabs for TB, HIV, malaria. So that's a good step. But again, it's a long wait. And why would they not share the technology that they already have now with manufacturers who are willing and able?
Have you raised your concerns? Because that is a serious concern to raise.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of the work that we do at the Access Campaign, is putting pressure on these pharmaceutical companies, particularly with mRNA, because it is such a adaptable vaccine platform and it has so much potential, not only to adapt to new variants, but, for future pandemics and these other diseases that I've mentioned. So a lot of the work we do is really trying to encourage them to say, like, you're putting profits over lives. And now that both Modular and BioNTech have made huge amounts of money off the vaccines that they've sold around the world, is it not now time to share that technology? How much longer does the African continent need to wait? We all know this is nothing new, that we've seen very high levels of unacceptable vaccine inequity over this period, and we must never, ever, ever see that again. So we really encourage these companies to come to the table and say, okay, fine, BioNTech, you starting early days construction in Rwanda. Modular, we believe, is starting a facility in Kenya. But how long is it going to take?
Yeah.
How much longer do we need to wait?
Absolutely. In fact, as you speak about vaccine equity, inequity, we heard Rwandan President Paul Kagame say that it's a massive milestone towards vaccine equity, because right at the start of COVID-19, the imbalances and the discomfort and the question marks about when the continent would be looked at, when the continent will be accessing vaccines, was a major talking point.
No, absolutely. And I mean, we do see that point. And it's really fantastic, that President Kagame, President Ramaphosa, President Macky Sall in Senegal, President Kenyatta have come out and said that. But the fact of the matter is that we still are concerned about how long it's going to take. We have MSF Access Campaign, who I work for. My team has identified over 100 manufacturers that could be receiving this technology now. So they don't need to wait for construction. They don't need to wait for these biocontainers to be set up. They could receive that tech now. So it's great that it is happening down the line. Like we say, we welcome that. But the urgency is really important. We don't know what's happening with the next variant in the pandemic. We don't know what future pandemics we're going to see. So again, sorry to harp on about the point.
Yeah.
thank you, President Kagame. But, our job right now is to say people are still dying of this disease, and we need to get those jabs in arms urgently.
And as far as the World Health Organization's target is concerned of a 70% coverage with COVID-19 vaccines in all countries by the end of June, many African nations have a low uptake of COVID-19 vaccines, and only 3 look like they will be able to meet the WHO's target, which is also speaking to a massive concern as you raise the delays that will be experienced in Rwanda.
No, absolutely. And, Africa CDC has now come out and said that perhaps there is sufficient supply, which we didn't have a year ago. But there are still issues with delivery. So particularly when you're looking at mRNA vaccines that need cold storage, when you're looking at uptake as a complicated issue, of supply chains, of getting these jabs in arms, of encouraging people to take them, it does seem like an ambitious goal. But it is still something that we should be striving for. But even if you shift those goalposts somewhat and say, let's look at what is possible between now and then, a lot of the work that we have done with our technical experts have said that these tech transfers can take approximately 6 months. So wouldn't it be fantastic if we could speed up the work of the mRNA hub here in South Africa, other manufacturers elsewhere on the continent, and if they were to receive that technology from Moderna and BioNTech now, rather than waiting for these, then perhaps if those vaccines were made locally, perhaps if people had a little bit more trust, then we would be seeing more jabs in arms.
As we speak about the latest strains that could take place during this course, during the waiting period, here in South Africa, the relaxation of the COVID-19 rules, no more mask wearing is essential. What's your take on the decision that took place in South Africa, and looking at the impact of COVID-19 on a longer term?
So I have to be honest with you, the kind of work that we do at the Access Campaign is very focused on, medical tool approaches. So we don't have a strong line on masks per se.
Yes.
But what we would say is that if there could be a lot more effort put into ensuring that more people are vaccinated. So we need better communication. We need to know what's happening to those doses that they talked about potentially destroying. Are they going to be sent elsewhere on the continent? Because relatively, in South Africa, our coverage is not as high as we'd like it. But in terms of equitable access, there might be other countries, around the continent. And that's why it's really important that we see South Africa work hard with regional bodies, such as the Africa CDC, such as the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, to see where these doses can go. But right now, what would be really good is to hear from our Minister of Health, over and above telling us, how things have changed, about why it's still essential to be vaccinated, and why, there's still some misinformation going out there. And it would be really good to see the Department of Health, not just here in South Africa, throughout the continent, and other, regional bodies, like I said, like Africa CDC, really addressing that issue.
You've welcomed BioNTech's commitment to developing much-needed vaccines against TB, HIV, and COVID-19 came, and as far as the numbers were concerned and access to medication and treatment for TB and HIV, those numbers sort of were on the back foot because COVID-19 came, an emergency. Health experts had to focus on COVID-19. Where are we standing now in terms of the developments and the advances within the TB and HIV and the others?
So the thing is, one of the patterns that we've seen as Doctors Without Borders, and a number of public health medical professionals will tell you, is that they are hugely concerned about existing patients defaulting on their medication. So because we've seen backlogs in clinics, and because we've seen, obviously, COVID slow things down, I would say that right now is the biggest concern, is how do we make sure that people are on their treatment and that they stay on their treatment. And of course, in terms of how we're looking in terms of technology developing, in particular with vaccines for those diseases, that's still going to take time. And that's why I think we also came out quite strongly a couple of weeks ago at the World Trade Organization, where the waiver that was proposed on intellectual properties on all COVID medical tools in terms of not just vaccines, but also diagnostics and treatment, and why we were hugely concerned. Because you'll remember in the HIV crisis that it took a very long time to be able to get, generic HIV drugs made. And we're now finding ourselves in a very similar situation. So while we wait for these vaccines, to be administered more equitably, and while we wait for them to be produced on the continent, what is really important is that people are able to get access to affordable diagnostic tools so we know what's happening with the pandemic and to be able to be treated. And because of the intellectual property waiver, that was an incredible disappointment. It wasn't within the spirit of what South Africa and India proposed in October 2020. We saw that deal has left those particular COVID tools out. So what that will mean for HIV and TB going forward, we're a little unsure because this was quite a specific COVID-related issue. But absolutely, as a medical health organization, we want to see, of course, as many vaccines, as many treatments available and given to people as possible. And for that, it would be really fantastic if we were to see those, all of those tools made locally and, given to the people who really need them, because we still have such a high disease burden, of TB and HIV on top of the pandemic on the continent.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for your time. Let's leave it there for this evening. Kate Stegeman, Advocacy Coordinator at MSF Access Campaign Africa region, speaking to some of the latest moves when it comes to BioNTech, setting up the first BioNTainers by the end of 2022 in Rwanda.